And before we talk some more about television, I got an email from our friend Pork Chop Jack, and it tickled me that nobody actually has asked this question, or maybe because I don't live on the internet. This actually, I say nobody's asked the question. He's asking the question because he got on Reddit where there was a discussion about this. So I guess somebody has asked the question. But he said, with the news of obviously Sabu passed away and they had a GoFundMe, set up by the family to help cover funeral costs, etc. That's what he's referencing here. And he said he found out that was happening on Reddit, where it sparked a discussion about how the lives of ECW wrestlers have largely turned out when compared to that of Paul Heyman, who is still featured prominently on WWE television and no doubt making very good money. This shine a new spotlight on all the times Heyman has screwed over wrestlers, with people bringing up such instances as Chris Candido and Tammy Sitch losing their house when they weren't reimbursed for charging company expenses to their credit cards. Remember, that's when, he put them in charge of travel, and they had like $60,000 worth of some ridiculous amount of plane tickets on their credit cards and couldn't make their house payment, ruin their credit. Or not paying talents on time, etc., and then using their contracts to threaten them when some, like Sabu and Mike Awesome, attempted to go elsewhere. So my question is Paul Heyman the luckiest person in wrestling history? I can't recall him ever experiencing a comeuppance for anything he ever did, and to still be thriving today on WWE TV when many of the ECW originals are broken down, or dead. Granted, the environment and style of wrestling was not conducive to longevity or mainstream success, but it's morbidly fascinating to see how Paul has lasted this long and has remained, to my eye, unscathed by his past actions. Well, Jack, except for what Mother Nature has done to him. But otherwise, because Jack says Tommy Dreamer wanted to assassinate him at WrestleMania, for goodness sake. How lucky is Paul? Has he ever experienced a consequence at all whatsoever in his life?
Which would have been a fate worse than watching Tommy's booking.
What do you think about this question?
I mean, there's a lot there. I don't think he's the luckiest. I think he's, in terms of self-preservation and survival, the smartest, or one of the smartest ever.
Yeah.
Without question. I think he is today where he probably wanted to be 40 years ago, 50 years ago. He's there now. Is he a different person in terms of the screwing people over? There were a lot of stories back in the day, even before then. I mean, just the Heyman is a liar thing didn't start with the downfall of ECW.
Well, no, and to be honest, because I was there concurrently, as the kids say, for the evolution, the metamorphosis of this. At first, they were all entertaining stories that captivated you, even though you could kind of, if you were with it, tell that there was mucho bullshadow. But then he got better at it. He got around people that didn't know it quite so good. And yeah, there you go. But go ahead.
You know, he cost a lot of people a lot of money. He led a lot of people on. People would catch him in lies, and he would be very charming and talk his way out of things. You know, typically, I think if you didn't talk to Paul, you probably got mad. If you got him on the phone or he got you on the phone, he would probably try to smooth things over in his own way and then lie to you again.
Yeah, yes. Well, that was part of the charm.
Have you heard of him screwing anyone over or anything since ECW? Because,
no, see,
that's the thing, is he a changed person? He's an older guy now. He's gone through a lot of things. He's had children. They're grown. You know, is he a different guy today? I mean,
yes. Well, yes, and also he's much better at it because he still continued to get better at it. And now what I was going to say overall of the whole thing is when he's not in charge of the money and or making the final decisions of the business, then that's where, his heat past that is minimal in the overall scheme of things, right? So, no, since ECW, he has not had to be that person and has had more of a chance for his positives to come through than his potential negatives. And it wasn't even a everybody said Paul was a rotten businessman without even trying to be a rotten business. He couldn't hit deadlines, and he wasn't organized for the sponsors or the pay-per-view commitments for blah blah blah, things like that. So and I mean, people can he spent a lot of money in the sake of art, or promised a lot of people money toward the end in the sake of art, which some of that could be said of me also, but I didn't go crazy with it and think I was going to conquer the world. So as long as he's not in those elements of responsibility, Paul hadn't, he'll still, I mean, I'm not there now in the finish meetings, but or the, creative sessions, but I would think there's an element of performative aspect of Paul in those to people to sway their opinion to what might be wanted of them or whatever. But I think the main thing now that Paul, as you mentioned on the biography of him, was he performs as himself. And he creates this world and this, aura and this whatever. And he's able to apply his talent at bullshittery, except instead of the 20-something-year-old psycho yuppie telling a Jack Nicholson story from the China Club, he's now the Alfred Hitchcock of wrestling, sitting back and analyzing things in a calm fashion.
But it's all performance, and I don't even mean that in a bad way because I'm a fan of his work. But like that's, you hear people every now and then say, like, oh, imagine if Paul Heyman had a podcast. Paul Heyman's a really good podcast guest, if you can get him. He wouldn't be a good host because too much of him in the performance mode, which is all you would ever get, it would burn out the audience quick. He used to say that he was going to, like if he hadn't went to ECW and started doing things, he was going to compete against Howard Stern in New York. And like, no, he wasn't. No, he wasn't.
Well, but see, that's part of the charm of, Jack Nicholson said he'd back him up. I mean, that kind of thing, we kind of got used to it because we saw it from the start, but other people, as he got better and other people were removed from the situation a little bit and just heard it from him, they thought, oh, these things are great. But Paul's not naturally, Paul can tell a funny story, but Paul's not naturally funny. He's better dramatic. He's not going to do stand-up comedy. He's going to tell captivating stories and create characters and things, but he's not going to fucking, shit all over the fucking heckler, boom, boom, boom.
But in terms of the question, in terms of the career span, again, he's one of the ultimate survivors. I have one of the fattest files in the correspondence files I have is the Paul Heyman one.
Now, did you mean to do that?
I'm being serious. I'm not even, everything with you is about girth.
Well, I'm just saying, hey, a lot of people are in favor of girth.
What I'm saying is, this file is pretty fat. Fuck, I can't say it now. You see, you're such a dick. I don't even know who I'm defending or what I'm defending.
You're defending that fat dick.
But you see the way he was at a young age corresponding with Norm Keitzer. And you could tell even that, was all performance. We here at Wrestling Press International, all this, it was all performance. And, again, it's lying, but it's lying like the same way David Geffen lied when he told them, when he was working in the mailroom and he just, stole the letter from the college saying he didn't go there. He lied to give himself a career and give himself a chance. And he went from being a teenage kid shooting ringside at the Garden to working for small indie promotions in the Northeast, doing everything from interviews to the programs, doing a Studio 54 thing, which is all networking. Oh,
remember, he took over the editorship of a couple of floundering magazines to,
he was the editor of the Wrestling News, I believe, maybe for a brief period of time. I got to go through.
Everybody had a chance at that at one point in time in those dark years.
Who got away with more when you think about it? In terms of the tantrums, both privately, like the Flair one, which got out publicly because he had a lot of public I mean, who exposed the business more on the radio before Paul and Eddie Gilbert? You know, and that's the thing. They were hand in hand for so long. Look, maybe, you know, and I'm not justifying anything that he did that fucked up people's lives in ECW, but maybe the Paul Heyman from 93 to 2001 running ECW with a crazy lifestyle, maybe that's a different guy than he is today. Not to say that he's not completely full of shit. And you'll never get to see the real Paul Heyman. It'll never be out there. It'll always be just this performance, and it's incredibly entertaining. Well, what exactly was the question? Is he the ultimate survivor? What was the question?
Has he ever experienced a consequence at all? And of course, everybody's had the ups and downs. And of course, I think we worked out he's been fired more than me from various places. But the overall thing is, I got a tickle out of the email because it's like, is Paul Heyman the luckiest person in wrestling in history? I never looked at it that way, but
Jerry
Jack
Lawler
made a
broke
good
his
case.
jaw. There's a consequence. Jerry Lawler broke his jaw.
Well, I was about to say, Lawler, tag you're it. But Paul has had his ups and downs, obviously, and he went out of business and the bankruptcy and all that, blah, blah. But nobody's actually, besides Lawler, now that you bring it up, besides him, Tommy didn't actually hop the rail and, engage in organized mayhem. But the thing about the guys, okay, so he went out of business. I can sympathize more with the fact that he owed guys money when he went out of business than the state that some of them ended up in later because of we've been talking about this. It's topical. The fucking shit they were doing, and you see the Sabu highlights, and he's flying through the end of barbed wire and the fucking throwing people over the top into the crowd. Not only the risk of lawsuits from actual collateral damage from citizens, civilians, in those things, but the guys coming very close, like they still are today because of some of this shit, to breaking their fucking necks, or actually not coming close. How many broken necks were in ECW, Brian? You're not only a mathematical savant, but also a wrestling historian. I mean, one of the Pit Bulls and Sabu.
One of the Pit Bulls, Taz. I mean, they have to be more than that. Those are the three early ones. Those are the from the early days, the three I remember.
Yeah, point being that we came up with 3 broken necks.
Because they all happened on TV. Sabu got thrown in the air by Benoit, landed right on his head.
Yeah.
Pitbull, I think, got DDT'd and just landed right on his head. And then Taz, I want to say it was like a stuffed pile driver or something, and he just went.
And he landed right on his head.
Right on his head.
Well, but the point is, in his dream of trying to run a wrestling promotion, if he went out of business and owed people money, that's happened. But to have fostered the environment for that many years of, well, let's just fucking kill ourselves in the process of this. That's where I've always had the problem. That's what we were talking about last week. That's where somebody ought to step up. They already have stepped up in the WWE and told some people not to do some things, and apparently they need to step up and tell Penta a thing or two. But AEW, nobody's controlling anything or trying to, that we have heard. And, that's the thing, because Paul, I've said before, and I love his talent. And he is one of the classic characters. He's the Jack Pfeffer of modern wrestling. He's a classic character. But he wasn't doing any of that shit. He wasn't falling into the barbed wire or diving over the fucking deals. And, yes, again, I've called guys, do a drop kick in the finish. I couldn't do a fucking drop kick, but I've always looked at it as if you are the booker, promoters can be different. They can not give a shit. But if you're the booker, you wouldn't ask guys to do something that you either haven't done or wouldn't do in concept if you had the jumping ability or whatever, right? Try to not ask somebody to fucking kill themselves if you're not going to be out there doing some of the same kind of similar shit. And Paul wasn't doing any of that, but he didn't bring the guys back, even for the good of his business. Because in 1990 fucking 8 or whatever it was, when they were trying to be big, but they weren't yet and whatever, couldn't he just say, just slow down a little bit? We don't have to do this every week because we have to be here hopefully in 2 or 3 years with everybody with their head on their shoulders. Not figuratively, literally.
I think his concern was less about people getting hurt and more about people jumping to WWE or specifically WCW.
Well, God, if I was being asked to fucking set myself on fire and dive into barbed wire every time I went to work, I might jump to competing fucking package shipping office or whatever too. Anything. Get me out of here. He had him convinced that with the Paulie speeches that they were a movement and they were a revolution, and it changed the business. They didn't make any money out of it, and we still can't get rid of it. And the guys are still trying to break their neck.